Good evening. Welcome to INT 233-234. This is your simultaneous interpreting class. And we're going to start first with the introduction to the workbook, Carol Patri's book of simultaneous interpreting. So, in a brief overview, the goals of the course, the goals of the book, is to help an individual improve their skills so that they can work through various concepts and exercises that give them the deep structured practice needed for a new or skilled interpreter. Both new and skilled interpreters can benefit from these exercises and this particular structured learning. So a little bit of background about it. Simultaneous interpreting began as a result of the 1945 Nuremberg trials. Before those trials, interpreting happened consecutively. There were 4 languages at the trials: German, English, French, and Russian. And it would require 4 years to conduct those trials if they had to be done consecutively. So interpreters had to select their own teams, their equipment, the space, how they were set up. This had never been done before, so there were no standards, there was no criteria to follow. Some of the important aspects that they recognized was that preparation was incredibly important to the task at hand, that their voice intonation had an impact on what was received, and that their own personalities could also affect the message. Now moving on towards interpreting research. Daniel Gilles, in 1994, did a summary of simultaneous interpreting. He basically explained that in the 50s, it was thought to be a very complex process. In the 60s and 70s, research started developing their own hypotheses and started testing them about simultaneous interpreting. During the 70s and 80s, they developed more models of what the interpreting process looked like. And during the 80s, 90s, and even to the present, we've seen a real change in research and a dynamic process of research developing and happening over time. So what we want to focus on now are 3 aspects: the quality, expertise, and effective practice. So the concept of quality. It's been a big debate about what quality actually means in interpretation. It's to convey the sense of information to the product. It's to include the relationship between the speakers, the interpreters, the source language, the target language. So the quality has to convey that sense of information within the product. Interpreters who exhibit quality in their skill sets also exhibit expertise. So now we have the concept of expertise. Experts are able to function with reliable accuracy, and they attain that through interaction with specific training and deliberate practice. It doesn't just happen overnight. Now, Erickson proposed that the level of achievement increases gradually. So there's no abrupt improvement in performance. Again, it just doesn't happen overnight. The age of peak performance, like in sports, usually happens in the mid to late 20s, and in the arts and sciences happens to people in their mid to late 30s. And then the most compelling evidence for the requirement of engagement in domain-related activities prior to attaining high levels of performance, even the most talented practitioners need at least 10 years of intense involvement before they reach an international level in the sports, sciences, and in the arts. So essentially that means this skill that you're trying to attain takes time to develop. People, professional sports athletes, individuals in the arts like music and literature and writing, they don't come to it overnight. It takes years of deliberate work and practice. Now, according to Moses Mercer, at least 6 to 10 years of on-the-job work needs to occur for an individual to be recognized as a real expert in conference interpreting. 6 to 10 years. So give yourself a little breathing room here. It takes time. Now Hoffman suggests that basically the novices move through very predictable stages in their development. First, there's sort of a superficial, literal understanding that transitions to more of an articulated, conceptual understanding of the work. The progression or the levels are rarely skipped. It happens in a step-by-step process. And rarely do individuals regress. They don't backslide in their progress unless they stop practicing. The initial efforts are conscious and deliberate. And as they attempt to learn, novices attempt to learn and practice more, then these efforts become more automatic and they start having more of an automatic pattern recognition. Now, skilled interpreters who move on to teach others begin to anticipate the trainees' errors. They can recognize the errors that are happening and occurring as they relate to the skill level of the person training. So we recognize that entry-level students in interpreting curriculum, they need mentoring, they need guidance on specific goals and skill sets to make sure they have steady progress in the area of expertise. Now moving on to the concept of effective practice. Erickson indicates that students progressed and improved based on their level of motivation, the types of tasks they're given, with opportunities for feedback and repetition in a limited duration of time. This deliberate practice, which is very important for being able to gain the high skill levels and the high levels of expertise needed to become interpreters. Experts also demonstrate self-confidence, that willingness to support their decisions in the process. Oftentimes students lack that level of self-confidence and they don't fare as well. So it's an important aspect or characteristic to have going into this field. Now let's talk about terminology. Interpretation. That's the product of the process of interpreting into the target language. Okay? Consecutive interpreting. The interpreter waits for the source language to be delivered from the speaker. Once that is complete, the interpreter then interprets that source language into the target language. And vice versa. This keeps going back and forth. This can range from the source language being a few seconds to several minutes. Now that few seconds of source language is often called short consecutive, where you have short sentences, utterances, or chunks of information. Then there's also long consecutive, which would be, lengthy chunks of information, full paragraphs, or even full speeches. Gloss. Gloss is a symbol or group of symbols in one language that is used to represent the meaning of a symbol or a group of symbols in another language. This is not translation, this is not interpretation. Okay? These are just, the alphabet is the letters or symbols that represent a specific meaning that when put together as a word in English can represent a meaning. Okay? So they are symbols. Hopefully that concept is clear. Now, illocutionary force. That's your intent or mood of the speaker. Oftentimes that's the intonation, the affect, the delivery, the style of the speech utterances, whether they are in sign language, American Sign Language, or spoken English, or any other spoken language. Interpreting is transferring the message of one language to another language in real time. It's not something that you can go back to. It happens in real time. Process. The process is basically the word used, the label used to basically state what happens cognitively as you listen, analyze, and transfer meaning from one language to another. This is not observable. This all happens in the head. Okay? It's all in your mind here. It's all that cognitive work. Your product, the product, is the message that is rendered into the target language. That's observable. If you are going from English to ASL, your production of ASL is your product. Okay? That's what you can see, or what you can hear if you're taking in the American Sign Language and you're producing the English. Simultaneous interpreting. This is the process where the interpreter speaks at the same time as the source language speaker. So basically you are rendering your target language as you are continuously taking in your source language. All of this is happening at the same time. Simultaneous interpreting. Source language. That's the language that you are translating or interpreting from. So that is the language in which the interpreter is receiving before they produce it. Target language is the language that you are working into. So you have received your source language and you're producing it in your target language. Translating. This is the process of transferring a message from one language to another, but not in real time. So a translation is something where you can see the, maybe you're going, an example would be a written English that's being translated into a written Spanish. Okay? At the end, you still have the written English product that you can look at and the written Spanish product that you can look at. It can be re-examined. That's a translation, not an interpretation. Let's see. Now we're moving on to the models of interpretation. First off, I'd like to talk about Seleskovich. Selescovich's model of interpreting is based on meaning. It's not based on the words or the grammatical syntax. It's based on that sense or meaning that you attain from the words. Okay? Now, this model also depends on your short-term memory, and it's based on a phonological information. So it's basically up to 7 to 8 words, 2 to 3 seconds worth of information. Now, this model is a spoken language model, but it does apply to sign languages as well. Now, this model also incorporates your short-term memory because it becomes the basis for your semantic memory, your meaning memory. There are 3 phases to this model. One is your verbal phase, which is the incoming discourse. 2 is your nonverbal phase, which is the processing that happens, your cognitive processing. And 3 is your verbal phase. It's your production of the message. The next model that's indicated in our introduction here is Moses Mercer's model. Really, there's not a real explanation of the model, but just aspects of what Moses Mercer's research emphasizes. That Moses Mercer suggests that most researchers agree that interpretation itself is a multi-stage process, but that the names of the stages and the content vary by model. So obviously there's more than one model out there to follow. So researchers do agree it is a multi-stage process, but they cannot agree on how they name the aspects of the stages, the contents involved, that kind of thing. There are different models. Now, the models describe the ideal path of the interpretation process. So what happens in the interpreter's mind, that's your process, or the product, the observable part that you see. Daniel Gilles works off of 2 basic principles for his model. It's that interpretation requires mental energy, and that mental energy is in a limited supply. And 2, that interpretation takes up all of the mental energy and sometimes needs more than what we have available. So when that happens, your performance, your product ends up deteriorating. It is impacted by the lack of energy. Okay? Some of our efforts are automatic. We have to use less energy in order to make these aspects happen. some of our efforts are non-automatic, so we have to delve into more of our energy sources in order to produce those aspects. So Gilles' model is an effort-based model. His model has 3 efforts. A listening effort, which is where you are analyzing the source message. The production effort, where you are producing the message into the target language. And your short-term memory effort, where you're storing information until it can be produced into the target language. Now, being aware of these aspects and phases can help you better control your energy and your efforts while you are interpreting. Let's talk about competencies of interpreting. Linguistic competencies is basically you have your language proficiency, your transfer competency, and your methodological competency. So first off, we'll talk about word recognition skills. It's important to develop word recognition skills so that they become nearly automatic. That way you are able to save energy that can be expended on your non-automatic areas or aspects. An example of this is figuring out the meaning that is intended by the utterance and temporarily storing that information. Okay? You having word recognition skills allows you to do that very quickly and use less energy. Now this concept is especially relevant to fingerspelling and fingerspelled word recognition. When you build those templates for fingerspelled words so that you can recognize them quickly, it's much less energy is expended on trying to capture that fingerspelled word that 9 times out of 10, can stump us and trip us up. So building that recognition skill is very important. These skills apply to both the visual and auditory recognition skills. Transfer competence. This is a linguistic competence that allows the interpreter to understand the message in one language and then express it in another. So your ability to understand the meaning of the source language and render it into the target language accurately without influencing the meaning is all part of transfer competence. Cognitive flexibility competence. This assumes that all of your other linguistic capabilities are already in place, they're readily accessible to you, and the interpreter can use them as needed. One aspect is called the control of attention. Gilles calls this the coordination effort in his model, and the attention control, once it's developed, can be shifted to different tasks as needed. Methodological competence. This allows the interpreter to know which tools to use to solve the linguistic problems as they arise, so that you have them readily at your fingertips, right there in your mind, and they automatically happen for you to help solve those issues that come up. Now, cultural competence. Now, under cultural competence, there's an aspect called bicultural competence. Bicultural competence is a deep knowledge of the culture underlying the working languages. So if you are working between English and American Sign Language, that you have a deep knowledge of the culture of each language. Language reflects culture, and a true understanding of a language includes culture, and that allows you to be able to provide the meaning necessary for both languages based on cultural knowledge. Now, sociolinguistic competence is the ability to appropriately register the correct level of formality or informality based on the speech style, the setting, your audience, all of those things. So knowing how to identify which register to use, when, how, is part of the sociolinguistic competencies. Content competence. This is something that Gilles calls ELK, extra-linguistic knowledge. Your ELK can be topic-based, or it can be culturally based, or it could be a combination of both. Now, one caveat here is that too much ELK can have a negative impact on the interpretation, so which could lead to too many interpreter-generated additions for the purpose of clarification.